Turning now to the prospects for the containment of social change in the other system of industrial civilization, in Soviet society, the discussion is from the outset confronted with a double incomparability. A. Chronologically, Soviet society is at an earlier stage of industrialization, with large sectors still at the pre-technological stage. And B. Structurally, its economic and its political institutions are essentially different. Total nationalization and dictatorship. The interconnection between the two aspects aggravates the difficulties of the analysis. The historical backwardness not only enables but compels Soviet industrialization to proceed without planned waste and obsolescence, without the restrictions on productivity imposed by the interests of private profit, and with planned satisfaction of still unfulfilled vital needs after, and perhaps even simultaneously with, the priorities of military and political needs. Is this greater rationality of industrialization only the token and advantage of historical backwardness, likely to disappear once the advanced level is reached? Is it the same historical backwardness which, on the other hand, enforces, under the conditions of the competitive coexistence with advanced capitalism, the total development and control of all resources by a dictatorial regime? And after having attained the goal of catching up and overtaking, would Soviet society then be able to liberalize the totalitarian controls to the point where a qualitative change could take place? The argument from historical backwardness, according to which liberation must, under the prevailing conditions of material and intellectual immaturity, necessarily be the work of force and administration, is not only the core of Soviet Marxism, but also that of the theoreticians of educational dictatorship from Plato to Rousseau. It is easily ridiculed but hard to refute because it has the merit to acknowledge, without much hypocrisy, the conditions, material and intellectual, which serve to prevent genuine and intelligent self-determination. Moreover, the argument debunks the repressive ideology of freedom, according to which human liberty can blossom forth in a life of toil, poverty, and stupidity. Indeed, society must first create the material prerequisites of freedom for all its members before it can be a free society. It must first create the wealth before being able to distribute it according to the freely developing needs of the individual. It must first enable its slaves to learn and see and think before they know what is going on and what they themselves can do to change it. And to the degree to which the slaves have been preconditioned to exist as slaves and be content in that role, their liberation necessarily appears to come from without and from above. They must be forced to be free, to see objects as they are, and sometimes as they ought to appear. They must be shown the good road they are in search of. But with all its truth, the argument cannot answer the time-honored question, who educates the educators, and where is the proof that they are in possession of the good? The question is not invalidated by arguing that it is equally applicable to certain democratic forms of government where the fateful decisions on what is good for the nation are made by elected representatives, or rather endorsed by elected representatives, elected under conditions of effective and freely accepted indoctrination. Still, the only possible excuse, it is weak enough, for educational dictatorship is that the terrible risk which it involves may not be more terrible than the risk which the great liberal as well as the authoritarian societies are taking now, nor may the costs be much higher. However, the dialectical logic insists, against the language of brute facts and ideology, that the slaves must be free for their liberation before they can become free, and that the end must be operative in the means to attain it. Marx's proposition that the liberation of the working class must be the action of the working class itself states this a priori. Socialism must become reality with the first act of the revolution, because it must already be in the consciousness and action of those who carry the revolution. True, there is a first phase of socialist construction during which the new society is still stamped with the birthmarks of the old society from whose womb it emerges, end quote. But the qualitative change from the old to the new society occurred when this phase began. According to Marx, the second phase is literally constituted in the first phase. The qualitatively new mode of life generated by the new mode of production appears in the socialist revolution, which is the end and at the end of the capitalist system. Socialist construction begins with the first phase of the revolution. By the same token, the transition from to each according to his work to each according to his needs is determined by the first phase, not only by the creation of the technological and material base, but also, and this is decisive, by the mode in which it is created. Control of the productive process by the immediate producers is supposed to initiate the development which distinguishes the history of free men from the prehistory of man. This is a society in which the former objects of productivity first become the human individuals who plan and use the instruments of their labor for the realization of their own humane needs and faculties. For the first time in history, men would act freely and collectively under and against the necessity which limits their freedom and their humanity. Therefore, all repression imposed by necessity would be truly self-imposed necessity. In contrast to this conception, the actual development in present-day communist society postpones, or is compelled to postpone by the international situation, the qualitative change to the second phase, and the transition from capitalism to socialism appears, in spite of the revolution, still as quantitative change. The enslavement of man by the instruments of his labor continues in a highly rationalized and vastly efficient and promising form.